Highlighting data for a chart is important because it affects the way that data and labels feed into the chart. Let's look at this animal rescue data. We have the names of the shelters, the shelter numbers, and the quarterly and total expenses. I'm going to start out showing you a few different ways of highlighting. Some are good and some are bad. Let's highlight just the data and say that we want to show the animal shelter information as well as the quarterly expenses. I'm going to start off highlighting just this data, which includes the animal shelter information and the quarterly expenses. Let's create a chart. You can go to recommended charts and choose one from here, or you can choose from the column, line, pie chart, and so forth here. I'm just going to go to recommended charts, pull one in, and you could it's being stubborn there, and you can see from this chart that you have the names of the shelters here. You do not have any names in the series, and there's this weird blue column that's in each series. Now remember, we highlighted the name of the rescue, which is showing, the shelter number, and then the quarterly expenses. So how do we know what is what in this chart? It's not a very good chart because it doesn't automatically tell you what this data means. If we look at the values of our columns and just hover over those, you can see it says series point saving grace value 1040. Well, if we look at that, that's the shelter number. So that would need to be removed for each of these column sets. The series numbers are incorrect too. We already know this means that it's the shelter number. And if we hover over these, we can see that saving grace is 27,000, 25,700, and so forth. So those are the quarterly expenses. This would need to be removed, and these would need to be changed so that they showed quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and so forth. So we highlighted too much data. We don't need the names and the shelter numbers. So I'm going to delete that. There is a way that you can edit that and pull in the labels, but it's almost just as easy to create another chart. In this case, I'm not going to pull in the names. I'm just going to pull in the numbers, and I'm just going to pull in the data. Going to go to my recommended charts. And once again, it's not a very good chart. It doesn't have good labels. Obviously, you'll go back and change the chart title, so I'm ignoring those for right now. Again, you have that small blue column. You have the numbers 1 through 10 and the series. So we already know this is probably pulling in the shelter number because it thinks it's data that should be in a column. So we'll strike that out. We know that these are the quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 items. Remember before the 1 through 10, there are 10 shelters, so those should display the shelter numbers. But because of the way it's pulling in the data, Excel is confused that those are numbers. Okay, so that was not a good way to highlight the data either. Let's go in and highlight the B3 to B13 cells. This time I'm highlighting the column labels along with the data. Those should feed into the chart automatically. Now we can see once again that it's pulling in the correct labels here, but it's still having a problem with that shelter number because it's a number and it thinks it should go in with be included with the data. There are ways again that we can use the select data option under the chart elements to edit that data, but we are not going to do that. Let's do this a little differently. One way you could avoid it is take the shelter numbers and move those before column A, and then just use the shelter names and highlight the data that way. But what we'll do in this case is we'll highlight just the names of the rescues as well as the quarterly expenses. We'll leave out that shelter number because it does not like that included in the data. In order to do this, I'm going to highlight just the shelter names. Notice I'm highlighting A4 to A13. Then I'm going to highlight the labels for the quarterly expenses as well as the data. Now, if your data is not adjacent to each other, you need to press the Control key on the keyboard, hold it down, highlight your data, and then you can release the Control key. Now, if we go in under Recommended Charts, there's a problem. It can't even recommend a chart for us to use. The reason it did that, if you look at the way I highlighted the data, I highlighted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cells here. And on this side, I highlighted, this is highlighted, it's just an active cell at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we highlighted 10 here and 11 here. That's where it's getting confused. You have to use what we call parallel highlighting, where you highlight the same number of cells for each one. I'm going to highlight this empty cell here, Control, and highlight the data. Go back under Recommended Charts, and now you can see that there is a chart available. And this is much better than what we saw before. It has the names of the rescues here, as well as the quarterly expenses. So all of that looks much better than the previous charts. Now, if you wanted to practice that parallel highlighting again to create a chart that shows just the names of the rescues and the total expenses for those, I'm going to highlight the total expenses first. It doesn't matter what order it's in. Press Control, and we need to highlight the same number for parallel highlighting. So we'll use that empty cell and highlight those. Now we have just the total expenses for each of the rescues.